Hello, good afternoon. My name's Matt Hamilton. I'm on the developer experience team for FVM. Now, this is probably going to be a fairly short talk because what is really nice is a lot of the concerns I'm bringing up here seem to already be being addressed, and a lot of the questions I had have been addressed by some of the previous talks, which is great. But from a historical point of view, I think there's still some bits to cover on here. So I spend a lot of time going to hackathons, working with developers, helping developers build things on FVM. Two of the biggest questions we get, the first one is, what's the difference between Filecoin and IPFS, which is about 99% of the questions, to be honest. But then the next biggest question people ask is about performance, about block times, about latency. People asking when the block time is going to get quicker, what about fees, etc., right? Now, the block time of Filecoin mainnet is 30 seconds. It typically takes about 90 seconds for a transaction to go through, be confirmed, be executed, and come back and be confirmed, right? When you compare that to some of the other blockchains, that's a bit slow, right? If you look at some of the layer 2 blockchains that a lot of developers are building on at the moment, then you're talking, single digits of seconds in a lot of cases, and fees are a lot less. Now, Filecoin is cheaper than executing on something like mainnet Ethereum, but still more expensive than one of the layer 2s like Polygon, for instance. Now, Filecoin is a layer 1 network. FVM is running on a layer 1 network. A lot of what IPC is going to be doing may well be fitting in to solve a lot of that. We've got a tracker within the DX team, and like I said, block time is a big thing that comes up, and we're tracking this on our tracker. Now, the question is IPC. Is IPC the answer to this? Now, sort of story time a little bit, going back. If we go back pretty much a year ago to Lisbon and Lab Week in Lisbon, FVM hadn't launched yet. FVM launched in March this year. It's just been about 6 months since it launched. We had a testnet out. We had, a working implementation of FVM literally the day before we turned up in Lisbon. We got the first transaction going through, signed by MetaMask and going through. It was a big celebration. We were there. We were going around. FVM was on everybody's lips, right? Everybody was talking about FVM. No matter what the question seemed to be, the answer was FVM. I mean, FVM was going to save the world and feed the children and, everything it was going to be doing, right? I'm here a year later. And what word seems to be on everybody's lips this year? IPC, right? Machi actually came up with in the original opening session, said, okay, let's drink a shot every time IPC is mentioned. Luckily, we didn't actually start that game because I think both of us now would be fairly well inebriated. So where am I going with this? The thing being is there was a FVM. We had a bit of an internal joke that FVM became to mean Filecoin very magic, right? Because no matter what the question was, the answer was was FVM. Even if people didn't quite understand what FVM is, it was the answer. And I'm seeing a lot about the same with IPC, and I'm guilty of it, right? I'm at hackathons and people come to me and say, well, what about scalability and performance? Oh, IPC is going to solve that, right? Even without necessarily knowing the full details about IPC, right? So I'm guilty of this too. Another big issue we faced with FVM, and again, these are kind of sort of like, in some ways, like lessons learned and things that I'm hoping that will help with IPC going forward. One of the things we learned is it's great to have launched FVM, but a lot of what builders need are tooling and ecosystem support around FVM. So they're used to using certain tooling. So, things like MetaMask, as a wallet, Remix as a development environment, Hardhat, things like that they wanted to use. But then certain things within the environment, like Chainlink, for example, and the Graph. So Chainlink is a well-known Oracle provider. The Graph provides kind of the ability to kind of get historical transactions and things like that in a particular way from the blockchain. These were very important to developers. And even though we had FVM launched, a lot of developers were saying, well, we can't deploy to FVM because we don't have these tools. There's a project called Safe, Gnosis Safe, and they were blocked for a while because they were needing a particular third-party feature. I think it was Gnosis Safe. is one of the projects. They were trying to launch, and we were stuck behind, one of these other things being implemented. So there was kind of a log jam without some of these initial things being implemented on the network. We didn't have the ability for some other projects to deploy as well. And it's not just sort of one network. We've got obviously the main network, but we have test nets. We had one called Hyperspace that we ran for a while. And then, much like SpaceNet, we kind of deprecated Hyperspace because we'd moved on. And now we've moved all of our testing onto Calibration Net. Now, Calibration Net has pros and cons. One of the main things with Calibration Net is it's meant to mirror, as exactly as possible, mainnet. So you can test something on Calibration Net and be fairly sure it's going to run on mainnet. However, it has all the downsides of deploying on mainnet because it has the same speed. It has, if you're talking things like storage deals, miners are looking for large 32 gig sectors, that kind of thing. So you need miners on the testnet that storage providers on the testnet so that when you submit a storage deal, that there's somebody to actually be the other party to that and pick it up and store your data. Now, one of the big problems is how do you incentivize that on a testnet when the currency you're using is TFIL, which is worth nothing. So you've got a storage provider using real electricity, real hardware, real time to run a service, but Mickey Mouse money to pay for it that's worth nothing, right? So what I'm hoping to go through this is that we don't end up in the same situation with IPC. So here's the thing: IPC subnets launch on SpaceNet. This was back earlier on in the start of this year in April, and that's great. So we thought, okay, cool. So we can start doing stuff. And it wasn't quite there yet. And as you've said, things were a lot harder back then. And with the new stuff, I mean, that's why I've said I'm glad I was in the earlier talk because it looks like that's coming a long way since then. But from the DX point of view, what we've seen is builders will see things like this and go, oh, great, so I can deploy, and then get a little bit disillusioned and then have to come back. So what I'm hoping is to say is with the new testnets for IPC and for spinning up subnets, that we think about things like block explorers, we think about things like bridges, we think about things like integrations with third parties. It's great that we've got people like Tableland saying, okay, we're kicking the tires of this, we're looking at this, we're going to be able to deploy it as well. We need to be starting to talk to some of these ahead of time. Another example is with FVM, we introduced a new addressing class, the F4 address class. That was 6 months ago. We're still battling to get Binance to accept that address format to allow withdrawals. Coinbase just finally did 2 weeks ago. So up until recently, it's actually been very difficult just to get funds into a smart contract on FVM because you had to go from an exchange to something like an F1 address, like a burner wallet with an F1 address, and then from there onto F4. So things like, how is this going to work with IPC? Hopefully, please look at how those side of things work from a development point of view. The developer is able to get funds in there, that when they spin up a test net, they've got a faucet or something like that can get there. When you start going onto mainnet, that there's a route by which funds can get to them. Because, one does not just IPC, right? So, like I said, fairly short talk. That's just really what I wanted to say from a DX point of view. The main takeaway is, it's great seeing all of the development going on around IPC itself. But what we've got to remember as well is that we sit within a wider ecosystem. We need to make sure that we are informing the parties of the ecosystem and trying to bring them on board because often they have a latency themselves and their own roadmaps. So we need to make sure that comes in. When FVM launched, we were trying to get the latest updates onto, Ledger hardware devices, for example. And, Ledger have their own release cycle. So we're like, okay, we've just launched FVM. I know I was laughing at the back there. Yeah, it's like we've just launched FVM, and we were slightly stuck in that people couldn't sign transactions with a Ledger Nano, which is like the main way in which we were hoping they would do, because we were beholden to Ledger's release cycle as well. So yeah, there we go. Thank you very much, and I guess we can take further questions in the panel.